Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Lessons from the Deal Kings. My name is Mark Herndon. I serve as chairman of the M&A Leadership Council, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. Now, today we'll be focusing on the integration and M&A capability development importance in your organization. We'll touch on the entire overall M&A lifecycle, but we want to drill down into some practices that can really make a difference in your careers and your organizations. We acknowledge that this panel is very heavily populated by tech industry superstars, but I can personally attest that their insights, their deep expertise, and their willingness to share those lessons learned, those lessons will be widely applicable to any industry and any stage of acquirer. And in fact, that's our real purpose here today, is help you and your organization accelerate by leveraging off the lessons learned, the deep deal count expertise, the years and decades of practicing how to get good at M&A, so you can take these ideas back and become more successful deal after deal in your own experience. Finally, I've asked the panelists today to speak from a cumulative and a collective M&A practitioner voice of experience, rather than representing their individual current employers or any specific current practices. And with that, I am delighted to introduce our panelists for today, truly distinctive, outstanding integration executives all. Now, those of you that are joining us, you'll receive a copy of today's discussion deck along with a copy of the panelist bios after the event, or available online at macouncil.org. And Karen, let me go ahead and start with you, and I'll share a few things about each of you individually as panelists, but I won't go into much detail because I want us to roll up our sleeves and go to work on some outstanding topics for discussion today. So with that, Karen Ashley serves as Vice President of Corporate Development Integration with Cisco, where she leads an industry-recognized team focused on delivering value in Cisco's transformation, and where she's personally responsible for evaluating and executing all M&A&D deal types and strategic investments. Her accomplishments in this role include developing a standardized integration methodology that focuses on customer experience, partner experience, and employee experience. And also, she led the integration of two of Cisco's largest platform acquisitions, including the $2.3 billion acquisition of Duo and the $3.7 billion acquisition of AppDynamics, in addition to architecting one of the most complex divestitures in company history. Previously, Karen served as Vice President of Product Operations with Cisco Supply Chain, and she earned the Master of Science degree in Industrial Engineering from Purdue and the Bachelor of Science in Industrial Engineering and Operational Research from UMass Amherst. Karen, we are honored to have you with us today. Welcome to the panel. And Karen, I think your mic is muted there. James, turning to you. Yes, James Harris serves as Principal Integration Manager with Google Corporate Development, where he leads all of cloud integration efforts. During his 10 years with Google, he has supported a wide range of deals, including both the Motorola acquisition and the divestiture, also including Looker, the Niantic spinout, Quick Office, Titan Aerospace, Makani Power, and he's a highly sought after guest speaker, sharing his experiences and expertise on M&A and integration. Prior to Google, he served in corporate development with Amazon, where he managed the integration of Quidsy, parent company of Diapers.com, Amazon's second largest acquisition. He also served as manager of integration with F5 Networks and has held key leadership roles in program management, business development, engineering, and international affairs. James earned the Bachelor of Arts degree from University of Washington. James, we are honored to have you with us. Welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
And Pat Bellotti serves as Director of M&A Integration in the Venture Integration Group at Microsoft. Over Pat's distinguished career, she has led over 100 integration efforts over the last 20 years through key leadership roles at Sun Microsystems, Cisco Systems, DocuSign, and over the last 5 years at Microsoft. Pat has deep experience in the go-to-market workstream, along with key prior leadership roles in finance, strategic planning, sales ops, field marketing, and training. In her M&A roles, Pat works with executives in the early evaluation deal stages through the entire M&A lifecycle through to integration complete. She has developed leading practices and playbooks for a wide variety of buyer and target types, and is also a highly respected speaker at conferences on acquisition integration. Pat earned the Bachelor of Science degree from UC Davis and the MBA degree from Santa Clara University. Pat, we are honored to be with you on this panel today. Thank you so much for your service to the M&A community.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. John Bender serves as president of M&A Partners, the exclusive integration partner of the M&A Leadership Council, where he leads a team of expert practitioners delivering targeted results for clients. John has led over 50 acquisitions and divestitures with an enterprise value exceeding $70 billion and spanning every aspect of the M&A lifecycle in diverse industry sectors, including technology, biotech, software, energy, environmental services, transportation, and others. As an employee at HP, he's widely known for his role as Executive Director of Merger Integration for the $20 billion HP Compaq deal, where he and his team led over 50 senior executives and over 2,000 support personnel in delivering approximately $3.5 billion in cost synergies and revenue growth of 12% 2 years post-close. John earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from Case Western Reserve University and the Executive MBA degree from Harvard Business School. John, as always, great to work with you on M&A Leadership Council events. Welcome again.
Thanks, Mark. Pleasure to be here.
Now, what we're going to do on the panel is we've got several really meaty, important discussion topics to get into, and I've asked one panelist to take the lead in providing their thoughts and insights on that particular topic, and then the other panelists will get involved to make sure we really round out experiences, viewpoints, and insights. And so, Pat, this first question is a really good one to start on, and I'm going to point this one to you. It's really about how do you get good at M&A, and what is that experience curve of M&A maturity like? We've always believed at the M&A Leadership Council that success is really heavily dependent on experience and M&A capability. So walk us through what you've seen as that M&A maturity curve in the technology industry and your organizations, and focus, if you will, on some specific decisions or inflection points that have really helped deliver consistent results along the way.
Thanks, Mark. Really great question to tee up. So for those of you that are listening, some of you may be serial acquirers and have been doing this for years, and others may be just beginning to develop an integration practice at your company. So let me talk for a few minutes about what happened in tech about 20 years ago. So about 20 years ago, the tech companies, I'll call them at phase 0, which was called buy something and throw it over the fence. So a lot of tech companies were at that phase 0, and somewhere along the line, they figured out that they needed to do something a bit more organized. And actually, I think Cisco was one of the first out of the gate in this regard. So what do you do if you have nothing? Well, the first thing you do is you go and get an integration manager. And so that's what many of the companies did. They went and put somebody in a role as integration manager, and everybody else, all the other functions supporting, were volunteers, or as we used to call ourselves, volunteered. So you got stuck with this thing, and it was your night job, and you did the best you could. So companies worked with that for a while, and again, if they're not doing a whole lot of deals, it's hard to justify much more than that. But as you started to do more deals, you were usually able to convince a few of the functions to get some full-time people involved. And you usually start with HR, finance, IT. These are your typical kind of heavy lifters, especially at the early stages of a deal. So you would go in and get those folks. If you had a big deal happen at this phase, you'd probably go get a consultant. And the consultant would come in with a whole bunch of playbook stuff and templates, and you would adopt them, depending on who you hire. So that would be sort of your phase 2. Now, phase 3, you start, and phase 3 can be very long. You start to get more fill out of your functional teams. You start to have maybe more than one integration manager. You're doing more deals. And here's an interesting note. If you do a particularly large or unusual deal during the beginning of phase 3, whatever that deal was can form your playbooks. And that could be good or bad. In the case of Sun Microsystems, one of the first big deals they did was called Cobalt. And I remember Scott McNeely saying, "Nothing will change, break glass, we'd like to learn from you." rather frightening as it actually rolled out that way. But that sort of lent that company into a very hands-off type of approach to integration. In contrast, when I was at Cisco, they acquired Tandberg, which was a very large, very complex, very hardware-centric acquisition. And so they developed very, very detailed playbooks. And that was great, but it made it a little bit hard to adapt to smaller deals. Karen, do you remember? I think that was a little before your time.
Absolutely remember that. Just have been on the peripheral of acquisitions, but yes, great opportunity for me to pick up at some point from there and share a little bit more of that story. So would you like to continue and then I can jump back in, or? Yeah.
Let's do that. Let's do that.
Sure.
So that's sort of phase 3. And in that phase, a couple of things happen. The integration management office becomes very much the ruler, and they're checking all the checklists and they're managing all the functions at very detailed levels. And that's not a bad thing. And you kind of have to go through that phase as you develop. A couple of positive things that are also happening at that phase is hopefully your relationship with Corp Dev is growing and you're being pulled in earlier and earlier. And that's not just the IMO, but it's some of those key functions are getting pulled in earlier. Now, you get through phase 3, and what has happened? And this is something that's really happened, I would say, in the West Coast tech companies in maybe the last 5 to 7 years. The functions, while we've all been doing our IMO thing, the functions have been getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And so now you have these great functional teams, and they not only know what they're doing, they know what their likely dependency counterparts are doing. And so not only do they not want you tracking them at the nth degree, they don't, that's counterproductive, and they kind of resent it. So the good news is your functions get really strong and they can be more independent. And what that does is that frees up your IMO to be involved earlier, to be involved more strategically, and to be driving for value drivers and things like that. So that's phase 4. What I don't know is what's phase 5. Who knows where we're going? Who knows what will be phase 5 for all of us? But that's sort of the outline. So wherever you are on that trajectory, you can kind of see where you're going. I'd advise you try to squeeze phase 3 in a bit and get to phase 4. It's a lot more fun. So Karen, why don't you talk about the evolution since Tandberg?
Yeah, thank you very much, Pat. And so much of what you said absolutely resonated with me. My tenure in M&A is certainly not as long as yours. I've been doing acquisition integration work for the past 5 years at Cisco. And I think I came in right at that inflection point that you spoke about, right? Where the functions started getting stronger, a little bit focus around that control, command and control around, did you do all the tasks that you're supposed to do? And for what I saw as the big change that drove us shifting the way that we approached it was the companies that we were buying didn't necessarily look like who we were at that point in time. And so it wasn't easy to acquire a company that was hardware perpetual. That was not what we were doing. We were buying cloud native software recurring revenue companies for where we were moving to as an overall company. So it really forced us to focus on completely changing our methodology, that it, again, wasn't focused around completing those tasks that worked when you knew exactly how the company was operating, to learning what the new operating model was. What was the value that we were looking to achieve by acquiring the company? And then having a foundational approach that provided that consistent taxonomy and the ability to see around the corner a little bit, but it wasn't rigid in terms of it controlled everything you did. So the process should be in support, not you be a victim of the process. And so the big shift for us happened at that point where It's about adaptability and agility to a foundational approach. And the adaptability is really focused on why are we buying the company? What is a value we want to achieve? And how are we going to get there from an integration plan that's tied back to the strategy of why we're buying the company? So for us, that's been a big shift. And I'll certainly talk more about that as we get into the next question. But thank you.
Excellent insights, both Pat and Karen. James, I want to get you in on this. Build on what Pat and Karen have said, if you will.
I definitely would echo Pat's comment about trying to shrink phase 3 as you can, because it can kind of get into that analysis stage. One of the things I've seen and have done in the past is to shrink it is to build scenarios out so that you don't play back the old deal, but come in with other deals and kind of stir it up a little bit. And that helps kind of people start to think outside of reinventing the last deal. And that's just, I agree, that helps. I think when we were talking before, Pat, I see sub-teams go through the same as evolution stage. You know, if you're spinning up a domain expert, you know, just like the technical infrastructure team or your IT team, they may go to these very rigid, you know, playbooks and everything has to be done this way. And you kind of have to let them get through that so that you can get back to the value creation. And the other lever I like to use sometimes is introducing more of an agile methodology. So it's kind of sprints. So it's kind of like, we're not going to solve everything. We're just going to sprint on this thing here. And that helps kind of break it up a little bit and get people thinking back to the value. But yeah, I'm very interested to see what phase 5 looks like. I definitely think there's something there. I just don't know what it is yet.
Fantastic. John, final thoughts on this topic, then we'll move on.
Sure. Well, I'm honored to be here with the Deal Kings. And I would say for companies that are further along in the journey, like our panelists today, you know, high-performing IMOs are not characterized by tracking metrics, reporting. That really devolves an IMO into a checkers checking checkers posture. And rather, what we really need to be thinking about is the value drivers. And so what I'd offer is kind of 3 highlights. First, high-performing IMOs really focus on decision acceleration at a strategic level. So good integration leaders really, you know, recognize early what the tension points are going to be in a deal, whether they're product roadmap or legal entity consolidation or support or any range of issues, or when issues are not going to close out, and they really get ahead of the curve, pull the right people with the right data into the right meetings, and really help facilitate decisions that are going to stick. And you know, the key is really adding value in the white space where so many companies struggle. That's the value, as we heard Pat, James, and Karen mention. The functions largely, especially in phase 3 and phase 4, have their act together. Secondly, aligning the integration strategy with the deal type DNA. So Karen, you mentioned your pipeline profile now. That's really critical. And if you're buying like companies, you can really get away with, you know, the cookie cutter approach. But as you think about IP plays, as you think of it entering adjacencies, that integration strategy really needs to change and evolve, and being partners with corp dev and getting that right accelerates value. And I'll end with that, which is, you know, the IMO is really helpful in fast launching the teams that can really shift revenue and synergies to the left. I think we're all intimately familiar with the time value of money on M&A deals. And so the IMO can really, starting in diligence, begin anticipating what that shift left looks like. And if you can accelerate realization on the combinational side of the synergy equation or the transformational side of the synergy equation, a couple of weeks, a couple of months goes immediately to benefit the bottom line for the company.
Excellent job, panelists. Thank you for that. Let's click into something that you all mentioned, which is value creation and strategic alignment of deals. And Karen, this topic is going to come to you first, if you will. And you know, as you move down the M&A maturity curve, as you've each discussed, the reality is you've got to be able to more consistently hit those value driver key results on a consistent basis, but it's far easier to say than to accomplish in practice. So let's take the foundation that you've each set and click down into decisions, processes, specific elements that have helped you take that concept of value capture and really institutionalize it so that you're able to consistently realize deal drivers. Karen, to you.
Thank you, Mark. And this is a topic that hits really close to home for me, not only in the M&A work, but coming to M&A from being on the organic side of the house and new product introduction. There's a lot of analogies here. So if, let me just highlight a couple of areas that are focused in our approach around the value drivers, value creation. So the first thing that we took a look at was really looking around the overall process and breaking it down into two consumable chunks. One is looking at the vision of the strategy for the acquisition to how we determine the valuation. And this is working very closely with our corporate development team where we're peers. We don't do the same thing, but we each bring different value to the table, and with the business units or the business leaders or the sponsors for the acquisitions. The second part of it, once you get that piece right, which is not easy, is really looking at the planning to realization. And this is talking about the integration plan that comes out of that first piece of work. And then how do you realize that value, which includes accountability, governance, metrics, and all of that. A big piece of this is also the continuous improvement. So I never look at any deal we've ever done and said, gosh, we've done the best and we can never do it better. It's always, what did we learn from that acquisition or divestiture or any kind of engagement? And how are we capturing those lessons learned and bringing those into the next deal? So my goal is to get more predictive, and we've digitized a lot of our M&A approach, including all of our data, our governance around it. And so we're at the cusp of using some predictive analytics to be able to predict risk on future deals based on past performance of like deals. So that's sort of within reach, but still a little aspirational as we're getting better at the analytics and the AI piece. So let me talk a little bit more about how we do this. So on that first piece of vision to valuation, our role as the IMO is to really push the buttons. I think all of us start with a deal and with the sponsor says, I know what I want to do. I want to buy this company. Here's why. It becomes those multiple clicks down, is really understanding, let's get to the heart of why this company, why this technology, are the customers going to buy it? Is it going to be successful inside of our company? It was greatly successful outside, but are they going to be able to deal with Cisco, a little bit more bureaucratic, a little bit more levels of approvals versus some of the startup companies we're acquiring? And then to look at, again, why are we buying this company? What is the gap we're looking to fill? Is it talent and to accelerate getting to a roadmap deliverable? Is it to get into an adjacency like John talked about, is something that's maybe not in the space we're in? Again, this all goes into, therefore, developing the integration plan. And then defining what the metrics are and those value drivers with accountable leaders, and the metrics down to monthly, quarterly metrics that we're then going to go back on a regular cadence to measure performance to. We call this process our acquisition strategy assessment process. It has three pieces to it. Number one and number two, we call them ASA number one and number two, is basically done one-sided. Our acquisition strategy assessment, number three, is done two-sided. And two-sided, this means that we're doing it with the acquired leadership team. Our goal is to get this done before close. I know that's very hard to do because there's a lot of information, especially in the case of a public company, that you can't do that. But where you can, we like to sit down between both leadership teams and be able to say, this is what our intent is, and this is how. What do you think, acquired team, who know your business way better than we do? And now you're able to build like a joint strategy on how you're going to move forward post-close and how you're going to move forward with the integration plan. So if I just summarize it into a couple steps, again, this is more around the value creation part of it. We certainly have a lot of what we call operating norms in terms of how we're going to enable all of this. All the employee onboarding, the IT piece of it, procurement, all of that happens also in the background. But from the valuation side of it, it's really making sure that the acquisition strategy is clearly defined and is aligned to amongst your leadership and the acquired leadership team, that there are defined measurable risks and mitigation plans. One of the learnings that we had on this topic is it was really hard to get leaders, subject matter experts, to actually quantify risks.
Yeah.
And I really pushed to the point of saying, you know way better than I do about a tax issue. So please put your best estimate on the probability and the cost impact to that, because therefore the leadership can make a decision around it, because they're not going to be a tax expert.
Great.
So really getting to that point that we define that. And then as you move into diligence, those are the things you're going to validate. Those are the risks you're going to go walk through. You're going to get more data around it, so that as you move towards your actual final decision, you have the best information possible to move forward. We've also developed an executive diligence readout so that we really up-level diligence, because everyone wants to talk about their stuff. How do you really up-level it to the risks that really matter to deal success? And again,
Excellent.
that goes back to the strategy and back to the value drivers.
Right.
So with that, John, or sorry,
Yeah,
Mark.
Karen, this is fantastic. So much there, and we're going to come back to this. And for all those participating with us, please use your chat pod at the control panel on your right. Lob in some questions. We'll cut over to open forum questions here in just a couple of minutes or so, and we'll take as many as we can. But for right now, James, build on that platform that Karen laid for us on how do you really institutionalize value capture?
Actually, to something Karen said, and I'm even going back to my engineering days, if it's a product or launching something, I really want like a very short summary of what we're trying to do here. And, managing engineers, it would be like, is it going to solve problem A and B? Great, we'll write that code. If it's C and D, we're not writing that code. And it just kind of helps test and validate that, which I think is really important. And something else that you said that really resonates with me is that quantifying the risk. Is this, low probability, high impact, high probability? Then we probably need to focus on it. So just even getting to that level, I think, is really important. But I think, taking what Karen said, and we do something very similar in other places I've been, is being really clear pre-close, if anytime you can, with the inbound team about what's going to stay the same and what's going to change and when. Because I think that's really important to help kind of get them engaged in that discussion, because sometimes they can say, whoa, wait a minute, this is going to be really super impactful because we didn't think that it was, and that helps us adjust those timelines. It also helps kind of manage the change that team is going through. And I remember one case where we were thinking about, they had a juice bar person that ran the juice bar, and we talked about that we were going to kind of phase them out over 30 days, and culturally that was super important to them. So we just, after that conversation, we realized the juice bar person stays for at least 90 days because that was just one less change that the team would have to go through. And I think that's just kind of thinking about those kind of conversations and having real frank discussions around it, because I think there's definitely some things that as an integration team we need to do to protect the team and allow them to do what we think is really important. And that, everybody else has their integration agendas, and we sometimes have to hold off on it. I think the other side of this is also talking with the inbound team about what they would like to offload to corporate, because I think that's also a way that they can get value and kind of get aligned.
Excellent.
One other last thing here is we actually encourage frank conversations about what is going to be different and what do you need to unlearn as a startup company to be a part of a larger enterprise. Because in a startup, you wear multiple hats, you do lots of different things. In a larger company, you've built for scale, so you have whole teams that may be doing this. So how do you kind of fan out or figure out which hat you want to wear? I think having those detailed conversations is really important to get the employees, which are the value in tech companies, engaged and aligned so that you can return to getting back to those key value drivers.
Excellent. Pat, what would you build on from that comment?
Yeah, thank you. I really, Karen, your comments really resonated with me as well as James's. I guess I'll just make one comment, especially for folks that are earlier in this evolution, is you need to get involved with the engineering or business group, with Corp Dev, as early as possible to try to help them articulate the value drivers. Because at every gate that they take, even in those early stages, they start to solidify ideas around how they're going to get the value out. They start to share with the target kind of a little bit of a vision. And what you don't want them to do is to rely, I think James alluded to this earlier, on that deal that we did a year ago. And that may not have the same value drivers as this deal at all. But if you don't get them to articulate how are they going to get the value out of this deal early, they'll start down a path that will just make it that much more difficult to actually get the value. That's
true insight. Thank you, panelists all. John, 1 minute to close out, and then we'll move to the next topic.
Sure. So M&A deals across the life cycle are really agile sprints from a strategic idea all the way to getting cash flows at the end. And there's a lot of assumptions built into that. So what I would offer for those companies that are really thinking about tuning up their value capture is to think about the fact that 35% or more of synergies, particularly on large deals, are often identified post-close. And so the value the IMO can provide is to unpack those assumptions that have happened throughout the life cycle and really get the organization to think about reanalyzing, retesting, relitigating, realigning on the targets. And why? Well, we want to break down the hedges that are inherent in due diligence and in the model and in the integration budget, and in the operational model and all the risks. And if you can unpack that, you can add percentage points to your bottom line, and it can be a very powerful lens. That takes tops-down leadership. That takes change management. It takes some flexibility around your budgeting, and it's not easy, but it's advanced math that can be extremely powerful if you can get your organization to that posture.
Fantastic. Panelists, well done. One more really, really important topic. And James, I'm going to look to you first for the leadoff comment here. We still see even fairly experienced acquirers struggle with engaging and aligning target company employees. And it's so difficult to put real meat or real substance into change management, culture, communication. And yet at the level that each of you are speaking at, this is an important element, especially, James, as you just said, the value of a tech deal is often in the highly competent technical employees. How do we move to that next plateau of real substance with comms, change, and culture?
I think, it's having some real frank conversations around what we're trying to accomplish. I mean, it kind of comes back to, the phases of what we're trying to do that Pat talked about, and then also what's the strategic objectives and why are we doing this? The inbound team was doing something that was independent, and we want them to do something that's probably aligned with that, but not going to be 100%. So we need to talk about what that change is. And we need, I think part of that is also giving people time to internalize that and make that shift. And I think to your point earlier, I think trying to do this too fast often is where you get into these friction points where it's like you're madly dashing down, going right, and we tell you to take a hard left-hand turn tomorrow. I think that's where we have to be really thoughtful about, are we doing that? How are we doing that? How are we having those conversations? And as Karen said, I think the more you can have those conversations earlier and with leadership to get them to understand and get that feedback is critical. The other thing that I always like to think about is how do you embed your culture into theirs so that you can bring in resources so that they have more surface area with your host organization. That's the way I like to think about it. So, we use the term in a couple companies I've used as Sherpas, which are these guides that help kind of answer everything from the short, quick questions to, why are we doing it this way? Because I think a lot of times people will be looking at something as a new company and you're looking at it and going, this doesn't make sense. And if people can understand the why, oftentimes they can understand how to begin to engage and how to align. Because there's usually, there's very good reasons why you're doing most things as a larger company. I think that's a really important thing to think about. And I think, getting back to this coaching of even the inbound leadership from our end as the host is, letting leaders and sponsors know that it will be done differently, and that's okay. Look at the results, not how, because oftentimes you can realize that you're seeing a new value, you can see a new way of doing things that may be of value to you, or then that's an opportunity to explain, well, this is how you worked before, here's how we kind of need to do it here, back to why we're doing these things. And the last thing I really like to think about is having real frank conversations with leadership about things that happen in startups. And this is, most companies, most in tech, acquisitions are startups, is they existed for pure force of will. I mean, just drive, doing something that nobody thought was impossible. And, the leaders are going to be used to making decisions, and they may have to kind of unlearn some things around that and learn that they're now working with domain experts that may know as much as they do, and how to kind of partner with them. And so, being really clear that the things you did as a startup that made you successful may not work as well in a large enterprise. And that's how you have to kind of help them map that out.
Fantastic. Pat, I know you can relate with much of that. What would you add to this conversation?
When you talk about sort of achieving that engagement, I really, James's comments really resonate with me. And let me just add one thought to that. I was thinking about it. It's sort of like this concept of, think globally, act locally. So your company comes in with a whole bunch of welcome, and we're excited, and this is where we're going, and the t-shirt and the mug and whatever. That's all sort of the global view. But I find that people really can make the important connections with people who are in their function. The engineers talking to the engineers, the finance people talking to the finance people. Those are your peeps, and they get you, and you can see yourself in their roles. And so what I've really been encouraging my teams, particularly recently, is to that function to function outreach, where there can be that very intimate connection and a feeling of empathy and a feeling of this is a person who's a Sherpa for me, who can guide me through the next phase. So I would really encourage people to think about that.
Excellent. Karen, your thoughts?
Yeah, the other thing I would add to it, I agree with everything that James and Pat said, is to look at this from an inclusive employee experience. It starts the moment they hear that they've been acquired, and it carries through a whole life cycle to when they're in their function and being productive. So it's thinking through, I try to relate it to, I have an employee experience every day working at Cisco. All of us do in our companies. And I would say what I would want to see, if I look at some of the things that make it hard to get my job done, I want a more consumer-like experience. Things that we expect on an app, things I expect when I get a new Mac, as an example. And so one of the areas that we're focused on is really looking at the overall employee experience. A piece of that is the acquired employees, which should be the same experience, but then focusing on it to be more consumer-like. So it's easier for them to be productive, essentially day one. That's what we want. And the more they're productive, the more they feel valued. And what we found when we go back historically and look at, well, why does talent leave? It's because, one, getting back to that value, we didn't understand the value. We weren't clear as an acquirer as to what we wanted to do. So if we can get the team that we're acquiring as productive as possible, as soon as possible, that's our goal. One of the specific things that we're doing is also focusing on the managers. Every employee, the biggest influencer in their career is their manager. So how do we really enable those managers to be new managers? They may be experienced managers with inside of a new setting, with inside of a new compensation plan, with inside of a new talent development process. So we found that the more we enable the managers, the better the experience they, but also their employees have. So that's a couple of thoughts that I would add to it.
Karen, you all set a very high standard. Thank you. Excellent insights. John, 1 minute to wrap up, and then we'll move on to the open Q&A portion.
Sure. As we think about the changing demographics of the workforce, it's very clear through the studies and our own experience that people are more and more mission-oriented than ever before, and they really want to understand the strategic value of a combination business combination. They want to understand that mission. And so one of the practical things that you can do when you're thinking about winning the hearts and minds and engaging is really the role of leadership in putting that visible, tangible strategy out there and holding themselves and their teams and their managers accountable for reinforcing that. I think in addition to that, breaking that down all the way to the individual level, the what's in it for me, and addressing how they commit and align to that strategy is really important. This is where the focus on change management, communications, and culture can be so important. So from change advocates to pulse surveys to open door policies and all of that, get very tactical would be what we would offer, and make sure we're connecting that strategic vision to all the tools that people need to then really rally behind that and get engaged.
Excellent. All right, now participants, I want to turn to you and give a couple of quick instructions here. Your experienced content participants online, grab that questions pod at the right-hand control bar of your GoToWebinar app, and let's introduce some additional questions for the panelists to tackle. And while you're doing that, participants, I want to share a little bit more about the M&A Leadership Council. First of all, we view ourselves as an educational consortium comprised of global professional service providers, experts and practitioners across the entire M&A lifecycle, and we're heavily focused on helping other corporate acquirers really get good at M&A, so to speak. We do that through a variety of training programs and best practices, tools, techniques, processes, strategic alignment, all the things that we've been talking about today, through research and publications, as well as an industry-first certification program called the Certified M&A Specialist. We've been honored to support the M&A community for nearly 12 years now. We've trained over 4,500 executives and managers in the art and science of M&A from every possible industry sector and from outstanding global brands that are recognizable in every sector. We do have some excellent content coming up. Go to macouncil.org for more information on each of these upcoming training programs. You'll find a full program description, content that we'll have led by true expert practitioners, just like you're hearing here today. And as our thanks for joining us on this very important webinar, please be sure to use that discount code at the bottom of your screen when you register. All right, now panelists, I see a number of really, really good questions. So let me do this just for the experience. I'm going to go off of screen share, so we'll have a little bit better views of each of the panelists. And I'll try to pick out the best of the best and give credit where credit is due. And Pat, let's stay in our same order. So the first question in this segment will go to you. And Amir has said, Pat, what is the single most important factor in making an acquisition successful? Wow, that's a big, broad topic. How do you answer, Amir?
That is a big, broad topic. And certainly making the right choice of a company to acquire that's a good match technically as well as culturally is important. But I would say as an integration person, the leader who is assigned from the business group, from the engineering group to lead, has an incredible influence on the success of the deal. When you have a deal lead who is all in, totally committed, will make their, make themselves available, thinking really hard about the company they're acquiring, the people they're acquiring, the relationship, the value drivers, it makes an outsized impact on your deal. Now, you may not be able to choose that person, but as an integration manager, you can counsel that person, you can try to influence that person, and that's a big part of being a successful integration manager.
Wonderful. Karen, here's a great question that has just come in for you from Gamila. And she asked, we're a tech company with a highly effective new product introduction process, but with an immature overall M&A life cycle. How do we get the business leaders more engaged with corp dev and on the big issues of integration? How do we tighten that linkage?
Thank you, Mark. And it's a really good question because I actually can relate really well to that because I had that perspective actually when I came into M&A within Cisco, coming in from an operations role. And when I looked at it, I'm like, wow, it's not that dissimilar. It is inorganic versus organic, but you can't throw it over the wall and expect it to work. Similarly, on new product introduction, you can't have engineering going and developing something and then throwing it over to supply chain and expecting it to scale. So to me, the number one relationship is between the corporate development, the integration team, and the corporate development team, and being peers and respecting and valuing what each other brings to the table. I don't want to do their job, they don't want to do my job, but together is the only way we're going to be successful. So to me, that is similar to a supply chain and an engineering relationship. The second thing I would call out is as you acquire more and become a serial acquirer, it's really critical as you develop new business models, new operating models for the company, that it is inclusive of your acquisitions. So you're not just developing a new consumption model for your organic side of the business, but you're also developing it inclusive of what your acquisitions are and will be bringing. So the worst case I felt is to have acquisitions off on the side. They're special, so they're forgotten about. So when it comes to new capability needs, it's not included. So those are the two things I would say to me are critical as you're looking at furthering that expertise in acquisitions and that relationship.
Wonderful, thanks. And James, here's a great one that's just come in for you from Ian. Ian says, we're a large global company that typically acquires smaller, earlier stage companies, and our general tendency is to distract or disrupt them too much during the early stages of integration. What are some things we can do to better stabilize them in the first few weeks or months post-close? We've all struggled with that. Take over for us, James.
Oh, I was going to say that's a tough one, and it's amazing how that can happen. I think the real thing is going back to what's that value creation and protecting it, and really, back to some things that both Karen and Pat are saying is making sure your sponsorship and your leadership is also playing that protection role, so that we're kind of preventing things from integration for just integration's sake. I often joke that sometimes our role as integration managers is playing the Heisman guy, where we're kind of pushing all of our cross-functional teams off a little bit. It means not never, it's just not now, which is really an important concept to get across, because you have to give them a little bit of that breathing space to get themselves aligned. And it also is just adjusting that there's change management. I mean, they're going through they're small in a big organization, and they have to adjust for that. So giving them that space, just the space and the place for those frank conversations is really important. So if there's any way you can kind of create incubation models or anything along those lines that you can borrow from your existing infrastructure, steal them. But yeah, the more you can just keep the hordes away for a little while, I think that gives you a little bit more breathing room to kind of get them successful.
Fantastic. I'm really resonating with that. John, here's one that's a perfect fit for you. Eliana asked, how could our organization accelerate the M&A evolution on the maturity curve like you described? For example, if you're in our shoes just starting out, what 2 or 3 foundational things would you go accomplish first?
It's a great question. I'd offer 3 focus areas if you're just getting started. First, really set up a great M&A leadership, governance, resourcing, and budgeting process. M&A is definitionally a top-down exercise that's supported by bottom-up execution across a range of work streams. And that framework of governance, where we're involving the right stakeholders and particularly leaders in the right roles at the right times with the right understood RACI, so we're all doing the right things and the planes are flying in formation. We don't want a dogfight in the air. That immediately stacks the deck in your favor. Secondly, I'd recommend that you think about focusing on the tough parts of M&A. HR will integrate to HR, finance will integrate to finance, they'll figure out reporting, and that isn't to say that it's not challenging. It can be very emotional, particularly if you have some cost synergies on the people side. It's very emotional, but the IMO is particularly positioned to work the cross-functional white space issues. And so if you're just starting out, thinking about things like value capture, decision-making, your synergies, some of your deal-specific work streams can be valuable. And then lastly, I would offer just establishing an end-to-end process that guides everything. I very much resonate with the concept of a service development lifecycle or a product development lifecycle, and M&A is an end-to-end business process. And so if you want to be great at M&A, you need to have an end-to-end enterprise business process to underpin it.
All right, panelists, I'm going to throw this open to anyone. Victoria has asked not necessarily a stump the band question, but a really thought-provoking question. A few of you said you're not sure what level 5 looks like, but can someone take a shot at it or at least share what you are working on to improve now? That's really interesting. Who wants to start on that one?
I can jump in and just share not what it's going to look like, because I don't have a crystal ball. All I can tell you, it's going to be different than what we're doing. You know, from my experience, we're acquiring to get to where we want to be. So the acquisitions are the tip of the spear around the company strategy. So as that continues to evolve, our approach needs to continue to evolve. So today, it may be cloud native, software, recurring. For us, it's going to be something else tomorrow. So the ability to manage change ourselves as integration professionals. I've had someone that's on my team once that said, we're great at managing change because we do acquisitions and that's all about change, but we're not great about changing ourselves. And I think that to me is the most important thing. We have to be flexible and adaptable. And the second thing I would add is what we are investing in is this predictive piece that I mentioned. And it's not going to be all data driven, but it provides you some insights based on your own experience into how to make decisions on future deals and things to consider that stumped us the last time. And to make sure that knowledge transfer is available to everyone, not just that person that did that last deal and that had that experience. So I would say that's an area that we're investing in.
Excellent, excellent. Who else? Anybody else on that comment?
Yeah, I can chime in just quickly. Karen, I really liked where you were going with that and what you were sharing. And I think the idea that we are going to have multiple flavors or multiple approaches based on value drivers is really probably that next phase. Because the last phase, while we got away from one size fits all, we still weren't all that flexible. And you do need the whole company to agree with you that you're going to do things in different flavors based on the value drivers.
Great. Last comment?
I want to add one thing, and this is my crystal ball or kind of leaning forward, is I think one of the things I'm surprised to see is CEOs or leadership of acquired companies have been acquired multiple times. And so I see a different level of sophistication in the conversation and much more leaning in and much more having that conversation about, let's talk about what happens afterwards. Because before it was like, just get through the deal and I'll figure this out later. And I think that that's probably the area where I see more interesting, you know, I agree multiple values, but I also am seeing much more insightful conversations pre-close or early in the even deal thesis stage that I think will be very interesting to see where that takes us. I don't have an idea where that will be.
Fantastic.
You know, my ball that far out is fuzzy as well, but I would offer this in addition to everything that's mentioned, which makes sense to me. I would offer that phase 5 will be characterized by much more focus on the people dimension. You know, we always talk about the soft stuff being the hard stuff, and I think the integration office as shaping transformation in the organization more broadly and enabling that, I think is going to be a paradigm that we're going to see sooner rather than later, and it'll be augmented by the AI, the predictive capabilities, and many of the more operational components of integration.
Well done. I think we have time for one more question, then we'll move into closing comments. What I'd like to ask is, let me pick Jennifer's question, a really insightful question. How long is corporate development generally engaged in these processes? Due diligence and into integration, or only for due diligence? What's recommended? It seems like that struck a responsive chord. Who wants to start off on that question?
I'll take that. I'll take that. So as Karen said earlier, corporate development doesn't want to do the integration job, and we don't really want to do their job. At Microsoft, we do run due diligence. So the integration team actually runs due diligence, and it's a great, we're good program managers, we're independent, and it's a great way to get a kickstart on your integration thinking. But Corp Dev usually leaves. They usually leave at the when you close. They're gone, and I think that's okay. I had one deal leader one time, the Corp Dev person. We were in Vienna, and he attended some of our what we call our road ahead planning meetings, but he swore me to secrecy that I not let the other Corp Dev people know he was there.
Thank you, Pat. Other perspectives, panelists, on the Corp Dev question?
So I could add a little bit. So I resonate definitely with Pat. One of the things, though, that we've, as the integration team has stretched left to the early engagement and the strategy side, I've honestly hold my peer, the Corp Dev leader, accountable for success. It's not just a matter of doing the deal, but it's accountability for the success. And as we've shifted into integration execution, the governance that we have around our steering committees that are at the leadership level, they sit on our steering committees. And so they need to be actively engaged. And if it's not just joining a WebEx meeting, but actively engaged and take ownership where things go awry, because they can learn as much as we do. Yes. From the actual execution and how to transport that into the next deal that they're going to be structuring. So that's something that we've gotten to that place in our relationship. The question, I'm not sure if was asked, is how long is integration involved? And I was laughing about that because if it's an acquisition, I take ownership for it. I feel like I do, no matter if it's 10 years ago. And I think the company turns their head and says, oh, it was an acquisition, it's yours. And so I think it's really important to work with the business leaders on that shift of when do we step out? When are they better at running the business part of it than we can add value? And we certainly need to move on because there's more incoming that we have to go work on. So I think it needs to be that structured handoff between integration and run the business so nothing falls through the cracks. So that would be my recommendation.
Wonderful. John, any final comments on the Corp Dev question before we move on?
Well, I'm going to go back to a repeatable business process. And I think that the key is really managing the handoffs, just like you would hand off a engineering project through NPI into supply chain and ultimately through support and go to market. Similarly, we want to make sure that Corp Dev is really doing what they do best, and that is let's get wet ink on paper. But then at that point, making sure that all of the information, just like an NPI that needs to transition over, does in fact do that and sets up the rest of the enterprise for success downstream. So I think Corp Dev always should be viewing that acquisition as their baby, and they should be proud of it and they should enable it. But ultimately, there needs to be a line of demarcation.
All right, panelists, we're watching the clock. This has been a fantastic discussion. We could go on far longer, but I know you're line to line in meetings every day, 12 and 14 hours a day. So let's close out with some key takeaways. If each of you could characterize a final word of wisdom or insight or key takeaway in about 30 seconds, what would you share with the panelists? And Pat, once again, I'll turn to you to start our conversation.
I think at the end of the day, it is all about the value drivers. And as an integration leader, you want to keep the team focused on that. They may get off track, they may dive into their functional preferences, but as an integration leader, keep them focused on the value.
Excellent. Karen, your thoughts?
It's exactly what Pat said. Plus, I would add, it's around change. It's around change for the company that's been acquired. It's about change for the acquirer. As new culture comes into your company, how is the current team going to adapt to that? So don't underestimate it, and it needs to have very focused change management.
Wonderful. James, build on that for us.
I think just building on that, it's changed not only for the inbound team, but for our own teams, our own integration teams. Something you said, Karen, really resonated with me is we're good at integrating and bringing people in, but we need to actually evolve as we go along too. So I think it's constantly that evolution and continuous quality improvement part.
John, capstone comments on this topic?
Yeah, I resonate with the others as well. I think at the end of the day, it's all about change management, communications, and culture, and really enabling through those efforts people to understand the strategy and then really decide to engage and to really drive that strategy forward.
Wonderful. Panelists, can't thank you enough. You are a credit to your employers. You are a credit to the entire M&A profession, and it has been an honor to share this time listening and learning with you from your deep experience. So our sincere thanks. And participants, thanks for joining us. Stay safe, stay well. We look forward to seeing you again soon at another M&A Leadership Council event. Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.